What are my day one thoughts on Navia? Yeah, I'll record that video today. But overall, I think she's pretty good. Like, I think at the end of the day, it really boils down to the fact that the lack of content and the lack of just endgame in Genshin makes any characters that have more front-loaded kits feel a lot better. Because you can front-load your first rotation and a part of your second rotation's damage in the time it takes you to do only one rotation, right? Like, right? Let's say, actually, paint would be easier for this. Right, let's say, right, you have a damage over time chart, right? Right, this is damage. And this is time. Right? Cool. Okay, wait. My cam's in the way. Right? A normal team, right? A team that doesn't have front-loaded damage, a team that just has sustained damage, right? It's just gonna be this, right? Something like this, right? Whereas a team that has front-loaded damage will do like this. Right? And like they'll both end up joining each other. And if your thing is lasting for a very long time, they're gonna be similar, right? But if the amount of damage that it takes for you to kill an enemy is like this, right?
No purpose whatsoever.
Right, it's like here. Well, the team that has front-loaded damage is gonna get that a decent amount faster than the team that has sustained damage, right? Just because it has the potential to front-load that damage. And if the content wasn't garbage, if we had actual real content and enemies that had more than like 1,000,000 HP, what would actually end up happening, right, is
all the world holds dear is but a backdrop of constant motion. I stand before it, alone and unchanging.
fucking hell. Whatever, I'll just do this and then redraw the line. It's fine.
The world remains constant over the centuries, but human life is like the dew at dawn, or a bubble rising through water.
And then, at this point, right, if you need this amount of damage, the difference in time between the front-loaded team and the non-front-loaded team is very marginal, right? Right? Versus, well, if you're zoomed in, right? And you need this amount of damage, right? Well, the front-loaded team is getting it here, and the non-front-loaded team is getting it, like, here. which is a much more significant difference, right? So in other words, right, if you're not front-loaded, or if you're front-loaded, it's a very significant advantage if you kill enemies fast. And it's a pretty insignificant advantage if you don't. But because this game doesn't have tanky enemies that you don't kill fast, then in the relevant content, at the level of investment I usually look at, being front-loaded is always a fairly significant advantage, right? And that's something I talked about towards the end of the Navia video, because I realized that I hadn't talked about it enough, so I added it in, basically. It is that, as much as, like, overall she's not that great in terms of, like, actual DPS, her ability to front-load her damage is arguably better than a lot of other units. On top of also having, I don't know if I mentioned this part, but she also has the ability to, like, decide how much of her damage is spent on each rotation. Like, you can decide, okay, I'll use a third E on the first wave because it's tankier, and just be a little behind on the second wave, and that lets me start my rotation on a new enemy instead of wasting a Bennett buff at a place where an enemy is about to die. What's the downside to front-loaded teams? Is that they tend to be balanced to not actually have the same DPS as sustained teams. That's the downside. Like, in reality, you don't actually, or you shouldn't end up, like, if the game is perfectly balanced, you never end up with this exact comparison, right? Rather, this line, instead of being like this, would be like this. And then, which team clears faster ends up depending on...
The world remains constant over the centuries.
Are you looking here? Are you looking here? Are you looking here? Right?
Rising through water.
Can you give an example of a front-loaded team? Navia. Navia is a very good example of a front-loaded team. And it's not, it's like, it's more than just it front-loads its damage, it's also, it can cheat out damage from the next rotation into your rotation, right? So let me make another graph. Right? So usually what ends up happening with Navia is this, right? So you do your setup. During your setup, you have pretty dogshit damage. Once your setup is done, you swap the Navia. Use an E. Do a few normals. Use another E. And then keep going. Finish your rotation. Do the setup for the next rotation. Use your E. Your normals. Use another E, right? This is what your damage is going to end up looking like in a Navia team, right? But one thing that Navia can do is, okay, this enemy has, like, this amount of HP, right? So, instead of doing this, finishing my setup, and just fucking whacking on an enemy not doing anything to them, I can decide, alright, my E is about to be back off cooldown, so I can decide to stay a little bit longer and use a third E. And kill this first wave. And if it's the only wave, well, you've just saved a significant amount of time, right? This versus this, right? But even if it's not, all that ends up happening is you delay your damage. You can't use this E because you used it here, but your overall DPS remains pretty much the same. It's just you managed to kill this enemy faster. Right? Navia's ability to, like, steal damage from her second rotation into her first rotation, or from her third rotation. Basically, her ability to steal damage from her next rotation, because of the way that her skill has 2 charges, and the cooldown starts when you use the first one, not when you use the second one. So you can do a 3-skill rotation, even without sack. Right? Her ability to do that gives her a lot of practical use in content that dies in 1 or 2 rotations. And it's gonna make her overperform significantly compared to what her DPS over a longer period of time would look like. So she's just efficient in doing damage. Yeah, like, she has a kit that works very well within the confines of Genshin's dogshit endgame. Basically. And the fact that no enemy is really tanky enough for longer fights. Yeah, it's a form of rotational flexibility, yeah. It's good, it's a very nice upside. For example, a character who could slowly ramp up to infinite damage would be shit in Genshin's endgame. Yeah, because it's like... I mean, it depends on how slowly, right? But, like, I get what you're getting at, right? Like, if you get a character whose DPS starts at, like your team DPS starts at 10k, and it increases by 10k per minute. Ooh, after 20 minutes of fighting, you have a 200k DPS team. Also, your Abyss timer for 0-star has expired twice. So that doesn't fucking do much, you know? Even less extreme, right? You have a character that starts at like 35k DPS for team DPS, which is pretty dog shit, and they ramp up 10k per 30 seconds, right? Well, after a minute 30, they're at 65k, which is actually pretty good. But they've spent a minute 30, which is about, more or less, the time you can afford per chamber, at 55k or below. Which isn't as good. 55k is still pretty reasonable. 45k is starting to get iffy, but you spent 30 seconds at 35k, which is fucking, you know, not great. I will say, though, Navia definitely has some, a bit more issues in AoE content than I expected her to. It feels a lot worse than I thought it would. The spread for the shotgun is a lot smaller than I thought it would be. Is this Nick yapping? Yeah, it is. How do I compare Navia to Itto? I think she's overall better, but there's also the fact that, like, Itto doesn't have a good team with 4 units that synergize well with him, right? But as much as Navia could have units that synergize with her in the future, she does have units that synergize with her well right now, right? Like, I'm sorry, but it's just the truth that she works pretty well with Xiangling and Farina and Bennett, right? Itto has Goro, and then what? Like, Albedo? I mean, sure, but Albedo's not great. And there's a lot of unreliability with his flower. Goro is pretty reliant on High Constellation to, like, provide as much value as he can. And he's a character that's only really available for Itto's banner. Isn't, like, in the shop rotation or anything, isn't available from Lantern Rite. Right, so it's a lot harder to get him to C6. And then your last slot is also kind of like... I mean, you can use Zhongli. It's not bad. But, like... You don't really need the shield with Itto, I feel. Like, it's not bad, but... It's... He's not a character that is very shield dependent like Yoimiya, right? Because he already can very easily get a decent amount of resistance to interruption from the crystallizes that Goro will automatically pick up for him with his burst, right? So all you're getting is like the shield preventing damage, but like a healer could do that. And in terms of like how much damage you get from a character providing or like fulfilling a quote-unquote healer role, well, Zhongli's Res Shred is fucking nothing compared to, you know, Bennett's buff for attack scalers or shit like that, right? Yeah, and that's why people use characters like fucking Yelan with Itto. Like, even though Itto's a fucking charge attack character, and you're not really getting nearly as much value out of Yelan as you would in other teams, he just doesn't really have great partners, which is why she's used. So it's like, I do think Navia is better than Itto, but I don't think that's necessarily gonna stay the case forever. I think Itto definitely can be a lot better if they just fucking release more than one Geo unit every 2 years. Right? Geo's issue has always been and remains the just amount of Geo units. Right? Many of the Geo units we have are designed to work with other Geo units. Geo is an element that's designed to be, you put up multiple Geo units in the same team. That's why Goro's passive is reliant on the amount of Geo units you have. That's why Geo Resonance is by fucking far the best resonance in the game when it comes to like how much it does for the teams that care about it. But when that's your design philosophy for an element, you can't just say, yeah, well, no Geo characters for you for the next 2 fucking years. Cause like, that makes it not work anymore, you know? And that's why I was initially so kind of disappointed with Navia's kit. Right? Because it's just, it doesn't help that Geo thing. She's effectively not a Geo character. The only reason why you consider playing her with other Geo units is because Geo Resonance is good enough that even a character that doesn't really synergize with other Geo units can take advantage of it. Right? I've kind of come around to it, but with a caveat, and that caveat is I'm okay with Navia as long as they keep fucking releasing Geo units. If I don't want there to be another 2 years before Chiori, okay? Like that will be fucked, okay? And after Chiori, I don't want there to be 2 years until the next Geo unit either. Right? And like that's really what it boils down to. As long as they don't just stop releasing units like that, then Geo can be in a fine spot. But if they just don't, then Geo will not be in a fine spot. You know? Hot take, the only way to buff Geo is to make the Geo constructs indestructible. I don't agree with that, but also... Okay, I think the Geo constructs should be destructible, but I don't think that they should be... Like, I think that they should be allowed to have overlapping hitboxes with bosses. Right? Because the issue is not them getting destroyed by taking damage, it's them getting destroyed by an enemy deciding to walk in the same fucking general area. Right? Like, sometimes... Like, for example, right? Against Magu Kenki, when Magu Kenki does the fucking... attack, right? That kills your albedo flower. I'm okay with that. I don't think that's a design problem. That makes sense. It does a fuck ton of damage, and things that are vulnerable to taking damage should be destroyed by it. I think that's fair. But when the fucking chicken decides to... and then it falls on its back on your albedo flower, it should not destroy it. You know? It shouldn't. If you destroy it with damage, I'm okay with that. If you destroy it by just
in many flavors to the discerning
walking on it, fuck that. That's dog shit. Fix that shit. Can Chiori somehow support both Navia and Itto? What would you do for her kit? I mean, it depends on what the intent is. Personally, I don't really want to see a healer that's made to support Navia. So if she's a healer, I'd rather see her, like, taken into the direction of, of Itto. But I think it'd be nice if she wasn't, like, unplayable with Navia. I mean, okay, I've talked about this before. I think that the best way to go about Geo is to actually differentiate it from physical. I don't want Geo to just be piss-colored physical. Like, that's kind of boring. Right? And Geo has an identity with the constructs. So they need to fucking fix the constructs, make it so that they don't get destroyed by hitbox overlap. And then they need to release characters that play with constructs, that give you maybe a buff based on how many constructs are on field. Or that give you damage whenever a construct is destroyed. Or fucking anything. I don't care. Anything with constructs. Just do something with constructs, please. The Geo construct thing is only available to Jonli owners, really? See, that's the thing. It's not. Jonli has a 1 construct. Unless you have C1, which, like, you shouldn't. Jonli has a 1 construct. You know who has 3 constructs, plus 4 constructs in burst, for a total of 7 fucking constructs? GeoMC! Enables the constructs resonating, but what does that do? Cool, your constructs are resonating. Instead of doing 1 DPS, they're doing 3 DPS. Wow. Who cares? It's dog shit anyways. The constructs resonating is just Jonli's talent damage being slightly higher, but the fucking ratio on it is so dog shit that it won't matter. There's a reason Microwave's a fucking meme. It's dog shit. You know? True. Yeah, like, I'd like to see something like, I don't know, whenever maybe you can have an actual, like, damage dealer that whenever a construct is destroyed, it refreshes their elemental skill or something. And it's a very long cooldown, high hitting elemental skill. Or you give them a fucking really, really high cost burst, like 120, something we haven't seen before, and make them gain energy per time that constructs are on the field. Alright, they gain 1 energy per second per construct on the field. So if you have 3 constructs, that's 60 energy per rotation. Nah, fuck it, make their burst cost 200. If you have 3 constructs, that's 60 energy per rotation. If you have 7 constructs, because of fucking GeoMC, that's 140 energy per rotation. It's not actually 140, because I don't think GeoMC's burst lasts for 20 seconds. But, you know, it makes it an actual amount of energy that is actually reasonable to get every rotation. You know? But there's a limit to constructs, by the way. Yeah, but GeoMC's burst cheats, and it doesn't count towards the limit. Or maybe have a character that gains damage based on how many constructs are currently on the field. Or have a healer that buffs your active Geo character based on how many constructs are on the field. Or that gives your active Geo character a buff whenever a Geo construct is destroyed. Or fucking anything, but just make it about Geo constructs. That's what Geo has. That's what differentiates Geo from physical. It's not Crystallized. Crystallized sucks. No one likes Crystallized. Navia likes Crystallized. Navia is not a real person. She's a fictional character in a video game. How do I know you're not fictional? You don't. What are you gonna do about it? Anyways, that's what I would like to see from Chiori. I want to see some more construct synergy. But again, it's also kind of hard to justify releasing construct synergy when constructs are just so inherently fucking dysfunctional right now. So they'd kind of have to fix them first and then release construct synergy. But I hope they do that. I know they won't, but I hope they do.